Good morning, everyone. I would like to be punctual so we stay on time. My name is William Becker. I'm one of the organisers of AESCON. I'm a researcher and a policy analyst, and I was working at the European Commission until recently. I'm going to be introducing our keynote, Sam Cross, but before I introduce him properly, I'd just like to say a few words, a bit of practical information. The first thing is we'd just like to apologise for the technical problems we had yesterday. Obviously, AESCON was supposed to be an in-person, real-life conference. We had to move online, and we're learning how to do that effectively. So we had a few problems. We've made some changes to improve the system, and we hope that today will be a lot smoother. The videos of the streams and the speeches yesterday will be available very soon on our website, aescon.org. So you can re-watch them, and they've been kind of edited to make them more coherent. So just to outline the day, before I give the floor to Sam, let me just say that we've got, it's the first day of the scientific sessions. So we'll have the keynote until about 9:30. And then we will split into two parallel sessions, which are people-to-people connectivity and local energy markets at 9:30. Then there'll be discussions over coffee. There's speed networking, and anytime you can go and network with people. If you go to the left side of your screen, you can find the networking icon. There's also the poster expo. You can go and look at the poster exhibitions, and there will also be a survey at the end of the day. I think you will see a link in the chat to that survey, which you can take to express your feedback on the conference. Let me please remind you that you will see the chat screen on the right side of your screen, so you can discuss the presentation as Sam is presenting. We will also have questions, so you can ask questions in this chat window during the presentation, and then Sam will answer them at the end. Practical points is that during this presentation, you will see some slides. Now, if you want to see the slides more clearly, you can double click on the window, the small window where you can see the slides. If you double click on that, it will make it bigger. You can also make it even bigger by hiding the chat window. There's a little arrow button near the green circle in the top right, and that will hide the chat window. And you can also press F11 for full screen mode. So these tricks will help the presentation a bit more clearly. So without any further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker. I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. Sam Cross. He's the manager of the Aalto energy platform since 2018, which coordinates multidisciplinary research on sustainable energy solutions, particularly focusing on energy storage, electromobility, and renewable energy integration. Sam also leads a new challenge-based energy industry project course, and he teaches courses on energy markets and thermal energy storage. He's worked as an advisor at Eurelectric, the association representing the European electricity industry towards the European Union institutions. He was closely involved in a number of long-term energy modelling projects for the decarbonisation of the European power sector, in studies looking at the pathway to reaching the European Union's 2020 renewables target. And he's worked with the UK consultancy AEA Energy and Environment, and also with CEN, the European Committee for Standardisation. So let me just remind you, it's a 20-minute presentation, more or less. Please post your questions, and we will have 10 minutes of questions at the end. And I will now hand the floor to Sam. Thank you very much for coming, Sam, and please tell us about your presentation.
Many thanks, William, and many thanks to the organisers here for the opportunity to present. I think it's actually a very, very nice platform online. I've been doing several of these online presentations in the last months, and the kind of opportunities for interactivity are higher here. So let's hope all goes smoothly. So welcome everyone from Finland. It's 10 o'clock in Finland. We're a little bit ahead of Central Europe, so a little bit closer to Asia. the title of my presentation, Sustaining Our Common Future, Pathways for Zero-Emission Transition. It's a kind of a very broad top-level title. What I'm going to try to do is to take some insights from a Nordic flagship project called Flex for Res, and I will go through a little bit the details of this project, but then try to relate that back to how the conclusions of that project have some level of global applicability. So I won't scare you too much with all the text. I don't want to read out all of it, but a little bit of background on this project. The project itself was the overall aim is to demonstrate how the challenge of integrating high shares of variable renewable electricity could be handled efficiently in the Nordic region by stronger coupling of energy markets. What I am taking out of that project is basically what we can conclude from that project on what is the least cost strategy to develop a zero emission pathway to 2050. And yes, the results of this project are for the Nordic and Baltic region, and I will try in the latter part of the presentation to relate those to the global situation. Small amount of detail on the background of the project, sort of required to give in a way. The project was financed by Nordic Energy Research, which is an organization under the Nordic Council. A large number of university and institute partners across Nordic and Baltic countries, and the geographical scope of the analysis was across all the countries which are mentioned there. A very important thing for me to mention is that the project was led at Aalto by Professor Peter Lund. I'm essentially here representing Peter's research, and I wasn't working on this project myself. There was originally Peter's keynote slot here. What helps somewhat here is some of my own background is in long-run energy scenarios, as William was kind enough to introduce. So moving forward, and very briefly, in a way, why I'm representing this research is that we have what we call at Aalto University multidisciplinary platforms. And we use those to foster multidisciplinary research and education across certain thematic areas. And I've pointed out here on the left-hand side, advanced energy solutions. So of these kind of 7 themes that you see in this diagram at Aalto University, then energy is a very fundamental one. But you will see also some of those others which might be of interest to our audience here. And this is what we kind of pick out as our 7 key themes in Aalto University. But the key thing we try to do is to work across our schools and to really represent the kind of multidisciplinary vision that we have at Aalto. So I will first go through some conclusions from this project as to the kind of what it shows on a least cost strategy for the zero emission pathway to 2050. And then after that, I will come a bit to the policy recommendations from it. So let's move swiftly forward. It's very important to say that we have certain preconditions in the Nordic area on energy and climate targets. And those are different than the rest of the world. And indeed, they are more ambitious than those at EU level. I don't want to go through this every aspect of this table in a great detail, but we have certain objectives about where we are and want to be in 2050, and those objectives represent part of the framing of this study. So we have countries in Nordic area who want to be almost at 100% renewables by 2050. Sweden is one and Denmark is one, and even though Norway's target here is 67% in 2020, their objective would also be to get very close to 100% in 2050. So the shares of renewables which are envisaged are very high. Now, it's important to say, of course, at EU level, we do have an objective for 2030, an objective behind the targets, which is around 32% renewables. So we go rather beyond that in the Nordic area. We do also have in EU level the carbon neutrality by 2050 objective, which is in the inherent in the 2020 climate law proposal. I say it is a proposal. Many Nordic countries plan to go faster than that. So Finland, for example, aims to do this by 2035. Sweden by 2045. It's important to say that in all of these countries, although these targets are treated seriously, they are still not legislated yet, and that's actually a challenge globally and within Europe, that very few countries who are talking about carbon neutrality actually have the legislation in place. So I think we are all waiting for how this European climate law proposal goes. But let's say the objective in Nordic area is to be even more ambitious than Europe, and of course, in the global comparison, that represents an even higher level of ambition. It's very important to say to state that in this kind of scenario analysis, the framing of the project is very important. And in this project, the kind of starting point was the present policy base that we have in the Nordic area and the objectives that we have, and that we do already have a market-based system in place as regards the power market and an increasing CO2 price. That CO2 price both being managed in an emissions trading system and in CO2 taxation. When we look at the energy change, the transition that we envisage within this project, we try to combine techno-economic layers, social technical layers, and policy layers. And the kind of end objective is to give this whole picture view. And in that whole picture view, in order to get that view, we try to develop a stronger coupling of markets across the sub-regions and across the sectors, so say geographical and a sectoral coupling. And we try to combine all of these different analyses, technical, economic, regulatory, and policy analysis with the energy scenario modeling. This is very important. You can run any kind of energy scenario modeling that you like, but the background that you put into them is the most critical thing. Okay, and perhaps the other critical thing, not just the assumptions you put into the model, is what scenarios you want to run. In this model, we had four scenarios. In this modeling exercise in the Flex4Res project, we had 4 scenarios. Those 4 scenarios were the business as usual scenario, a so-called policy scenario, which was basically about enabling flexibility. It was about removing regulatory barriers which currently stand against sector coupling. And then we had a connect scenario, which was having increasing interconnection between the regions. Principally in Nordic area, that meant higher interconnection, so interconnection of power systems to the UK and Central Europe. And then we had a so-called combi scenario, which combined both of these approaches. So if you like, the combi is in a way the best thing we can reach in this by removing regulatory barriers and increasing interconnection. I don't want to go into the graph here in great detail. What the graph is showing is the different points in reaching 2050 across the different scenarios. Yes, there are some differences between those scenarios, but the basic conclusions are the same. We have a dominance of wind, solar, and hydro in the system. We have a strong electrification, so you can see an overall trend that the amount of electricity capacity is actually increased. And that's to support a strong electrification with more electricity going into other sectors like transport and heating, which might be based on primary fossil fuels at present. Fossil fuels are 0% by 2050, but actually in the power sector, there isn't a great deal of fossil fuels left by 2030 even. You can see that this CHP, gas and coal, is getting to a very small share even by 2030 here. And that's that part in there. And this is kind of representing that in the electricity sector, the biggest system change for Nordic area is actually between 2020 and 2030. What is happening after that is an increasing amount of electricity capacities to support delivering carbon neutrality in these other sectors like transportation and heating. Because we're in the Nordic area and because it's cold, it's worth mentioning here about the outcome of these scenarios for the heat sector. And in this analysis, a very key thing is to get away from direct use of use of fossil fuels in the heat sector, which in the Nordic region is primarily in combined heat and power in CHP, which is an efficient solution if you're going to use those fuels. But in the short term, we need to get that out. And one of the key ways that we intend to do that is by power to heat. So this excess production of variable renewable electricity, a very nice way to manage it is to put it into heat, typically via heat pumps. And if we're then using that whether we're using that directly in homes or in district heating networks, we would combine that with some form of heat storage. So power to heat is a way to decarbonize the heat sector. It's also a very nice way to deal with the variable renewable electricity. You can see also the overall heat capacity reducing. We don't need as much in the future due to energy efficiency. And so that's a kind of a key outcome. So what might you say of this Nordic pathway to zero emissions? The key energy transition, if you like, the decarbonization of the electricity sector is even up to 2030. It's a very fast transition, but many of the preconditions are there. From 2030 to 2040, we see more sector coupling, so more delivery of those emission reductions for non-electricity sector, but by actually getting those sectors, heat and transport, to be using electricity. We also see at that point more transmission capacity, which means we can export more renewables to Central Europe and support their transition to carbon neutrality. And by 2050, we envisage that carbon neutrality is really being delivered in those other sectors. And we're also looking at other things like negative emissions, for example. So the question is, and giving this very brief overview of the results, is what do we find from this project is efficiently needed to achieve this transition to a zero emission situation, and which of those measures have a very global relevance. So I represent global relevance by this little icon, and I will put that on all slides. First, I'll essentially outline how those policy recommendations that we get from this project and how we might consider that those might have global relevance and what kind of caveats to that may be. So essentially, we do need to act fast to achieve decarbonization. This is a conclusion for the Nordic area, and I think it's a conclusion for everywhere. If we postpone investments in clean energy now, we will require steeper and costlier reductions later. The key point, it will be more expensive if you do it in the future. You will, if you make more investments in fossil fuels, you will lock in those investments, and then you'll have to make the cuts later. You'll pay twice. In Nordic case, main energy transition is achieved in 2020s, and we do see the technologies are there already. Now, I think these conclusions, the same conclusions essentially apply globally, even if renewables are starting from a lower level, and thus the transition may take longer to achieve. It will not be just within the 2020s. It's also important to say that basic energy and climate targets, like those I outlined for the Nordic region, and also at EU level, those are needed as a starting point. So it's important for countries to have those in place before moving forward in this. It's also very important to have a market-based framework, both for sector coupling and for flexibility in general. And what we find we need in the Nordic area is to have this sector coupling for which is very critical to our integration of variable renewables, to coping with the variability of the renewables, and to decarbonizing heat and transport. Very nice synergy between those heat and transport demands by using storage within those help us to integrate the variable renewables. And the key technologies we're looking at there are power to heat, power to electric vehicles, and power to gas. In order to achieve that sector coupling, we need to remove barriers between power, heat, and gas and transport markets, which we still have in the Nordic area. We still have barriers between those. And we must, in general flexibility terms, ensure that price signals in terms of, for example, variable electricity tariffs, variable time-based tariffs must reach the end users in order to facilitate the flexibility. So the global application of this is that a market-based framework is always critical in order to allow for the right balance of solutions in each location, which might indeed be different in different locations, but the market base is important. However, something that may not exist in other countries is the basic energy and carbon market preconditions, and those are, I would argue, needed in place first. The other key outcome, another key recommendation, and what we need to deliver this zero emission transition is cross-border connections. If you have cross-border interconnections, power interconnections I imply here, but it can also be to a limited extent interconnections of gas pipelines, whether we're using gas from renewable origins, let's say. But these connections can reduce the cost and facilitate integration. They can deliver the renewables from the least cost locations, and they allow us to integrate variable electricity across a wider area. Then you can get higher shares of variable renewable electricity by taking advantage of the different climatic conditions over a wider area. The wind may be blowing in one place but not in another. On a global level, I'd say the interconnectivity should be increased, but this is something that we have to kind of accept as a caveat of this project. It may not be possible in every part of the world as geopolitics allow. And the last key policy recommendation that I will state is that social technical issues are really critical to this transition. The transition must be just. It must be just for all people, and you have to consider and ameliorate certain issues. Lost employment in sunset industries, public acceptance of power and transmission infrastructure, and distributional effects. For example, when you connect power markets, you may actually find that it increases prices for consumers in some areas, reduces it for others. And it's a very important thing to say on a Nordic level, on a European level, on a global level. The transition cannot be achieved without public acceptance and support. And this needs to be thought about from the start and not brought in later when those things are found to be barriers to progress. So overall, what we can say is that if we want a sunrise for renewables and we want a sunset for fossil fuels, and that is fundamental to us avoiding global heating, we need this, and we need to act fast. We need to have international connectivity. And I think I would broaden that here to the research sector, as well as these physical interconnections that I've mentioned here. We need a market-based framework, and we need public acceptance. And although this study has been developed for the Nordic area, I think it's very important to say that there's an excellent opportunity here for comparative studies to take the framework we developed for this project, which we can change the assumptions, we can change the scenarios to represent the specificities of different locations. There is a really good opportunity for those kind of comparative studies. But I think the four fundamentals are very similar on a global level. So with that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you all for your attention, and I welcome any questions on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was a very interesting presentation. Obviously, we like the link to international connectivity at the end. I think it was very nice. You started from the kind of Nordic example, but then broadened it out to a more general context. So I mean, I take away your 4 points: the market-based connectivity, the market-based framework, the deeper connectivity. I like your point on the just transition, that we should make sure that obviously there will be losers from this transition. They have to be somehow thought of and accounted for. So we can go to questions now, and I see that one question just popped up. I have a couple of questions, but let's go to the chat first. So we have a question which says that you mentioned that the transition needs to be just. How do you see the involvement of the civil society in the energy transition? So that's going to the last point. Yeah, okay, well, it's also quite complex question, and I think that the solutions in this involvement of civil society are very different in different locations. We kind of pride ourselves in the Nordic region of a high level of trust in government, which helps in this process. However, let me just maybe draw down to one, very local example of maybe I'll give 2 local examples actually of how this kind of situation can be dealt with. So here in Finland, and I'm in which is a big city next to Helsinki, and the city itself has a carbon neutrality objective. And I have to say that in Finland, the trend in the past has very much been for the energy sector to be left to the experts and for the public not to be involved. But in the development of new city areas here, they're really trying to involve the public in the discussion about planning those areas. And
you can argue that there's the public acceptance, which is very critical, but also if you want to engage people, for example, in managing their energy consumption better, but also, for example, using things like time of use tariffs, understanding to use energy at different times, it's very critical to have that. So I think if you can do it on a local level, that helps a lot. If you can start at a city level to involve people in those discussions, and it's where actually city level carbon neutrality objectives are really great for involving people in that. And the second example I give is just a very recent one from Finland. There's been discussion here because they're about to probably close down an oil refinery because the demand is actually no longer there for the fossil fuels from that refinery. And this is a kind of key thing, but that was almost at the next moment, the Prime Minister was there on site to say that they will support the transition for those workers who come out of that. Quite what the solutions are going to be, we don't see yet, but this is a kind of thing that it's very important that when those jobs are lost, that it's seen that politicians are taking action very, very quickly. Otherwise, yes, the public starts to get very concerned about the economic effects. So I think those are two examples I would give there.
Okay, thanks for that. I have one more question, which is, so you say that so just to bring it back to the connectivity, you say that connectivity is key to this transition. Are there any risks or drawbacks to, deepening energy links in the Nordic region and possibly more generally? I mean, of course, the context is very different, but let's stick to the Nordic region. Are there any risks that you foresee to energy interdependence?
Well, I think there's two issues. Of course, there is energy interdependence, and okay, this is a different thing we have in the Nordic region compared to the rest of the world, and even compared to the rest of Europe. There's a very high level of trust and sharing of policy between the countries. So there isn't that much concern about the basic issue of energy interdependence. Of course, there are concerns between Russia and Europe. That's a different question. But between the Nordic region, it's not an issue that we have. There can, of course, be security of supply implications, but this is, and what I mean there is, for example, if one interconnector is lost at some time, this is where establishing a kind of dense interconnector network allows us some redundancy. So I would say that those kind of dependency concerns are not so much of an issue. What is an issue, and I think can become that, is as we connect more to Central Europe, we have low power prices. If we build more interconnections to Central Europe, and it's what we see in the results, detailed results of this project, is that the prices for some consumers in the Nordic area will rise. Very classical example is Norway. Norway has low power prices with greater interconnection to Central Europe. Those prices start to even out. And that's something that you really need to deal with. And again, it's a really important kind of public acceptance question. So governments somehow have to reduce those effects and compensate people in other ways, because the results for across Europe of kind of connectivity are great and well recognized. But if it affects individual consumers, then they will stand against the process and the transition.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to end it there because I don't want to overlap with the scientific sessions which start in just 1 minute. We did have one late question, but I think we will have to. Perhaps Sam, if maybe later, if you want, you could answer in the chat, or in some other way connect with any other questions. I'm very glad this session went smoothly. It was a good connection the whole time, as far as I know. So I think it's been a success. I think the presentation was extremely interesting, and I'd like to thank Sam once again for his talk. And I'd like to just direct people to the sessions which are beginning now in just 1 minute. We have the session on people-to-people connectivity and local energy markets, and I hope to see you in those sessions. So thank you very much again, and see you soon. Thank you, Sam.
Many thanks, William. Thank you.